then we have to turn down this road that just is like straight mud, straight up a mountain. And it was like probably the worst road I've ever seen. Like you couldn't take a car down it, not even four-wheel drive. Like you had to take a motorcycle. It was like the only way you're gonna make it.
Hello and welcome to One Off Travel Stories. I'm your host, Andrew Tawas-Jurna. Here, each episode, I chat with someone about one of their favorite travel stories. That one story they've told countless times to friends and family around the dinner table. On this episode, I'm joined by Tara, a solo traveler, U.S. Marine Corps vet, and outdoor enthusiast based in Hawaii. Tara's traveled across the United States, has solo backpacked in South and Central America, and she was even deployed with the U.S. Marine Corps to the Pacific. She's got some awesome travel content online, some really inspiring content. I definitely suggest checking her out on social media. You can find her at Adventera. She's going to tell us a story about her time in Colombia. She was there on a work exchange, working actually for a motorcycle tour company, and she was doing a little exploring around where she was living at the time, which was Santa Marta, Colombia, kind of off the beaten path. And she found herself in a bit of a sticky situation, which also involved motorcycles. So I'll let her tell us more. Hey, Tara, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Andrew, great to be here.
Yeah, it's awesome to have you. Thanks for making time.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Um, yeah, I like to generally get started by asking people where they are at the moment, where they're calling in from. So yeah, where are you?
Yeah, sure. I'm on Oahu, Hawaii right now, which is where I'm based out of.
Oh, that's beautiful. Based out of is that home for you now, or?
It is home for me now. I'm not from here. I kind of like it was one of the places I went during my travels and just the place that felt like home the most. And so I am really happy to be here.
Awesome. How long have you been based out of there?
So I moved here officially in December, so it's been almost a year, but I also lived here with a friend during COVID. So almost like a year and a half total.
That's amazing. I'm sure myself included, a lot of people would be jealous to hear that you're living in Hawaii full time. Um,
I
I know this a little from reading your website and being on your Instagram, a bit of the story about your travels, and I talked about it a little bit in the introduction. But since it's kind of an inspiring story, I would love to sort of hear in your own words how you got into traveling.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I always had the travel bug from when I was a little kid. My dad had lived all over the world, and I just remember going to bed listening to stories about him traveling, and that was kind of the end goal always. And then fast forward to graduating from high school, I knew that I didn't really want to take the traditional path. So I tried to line up an internship in Costa Rica in the remote mountains of Costa Rica, and it kind of fell through. And then I ended up joining the Marine Corps, and I thought, this is my ticket to travel the world. And I ended up getting stationed at the Pentagon in DC, and I'm from Maryland, so it was kind of anticlimactic.
Yeah.
And then when I was getting out, I thought I had everything lined up. I was doing an internship in DC at one of the biggest marketing firms in the world, and I had a job lined up. And then COVID hit and everything kind of fell through. The job offer fell through. Me and my boyfriend, who I was living with at the time, we broke up. It just felt like kind of everything was crumbling. I was like, okay, now I don't have a job. Now I don't have a place to live. But then
Yeah.
kind of the silver lining was I had nothing tying me anywhere. And then everything went remote. So I ended up starting freelancing remotely and finishing college online. And I was kind of very lost and depressed at that point. And I was
Mm.
like, you know what? I never wanted to live in DC. I'm just going to pack my car and start driving. And kind of the thought was, I'm going to visit my friends and family that I haven't seen in so long because I was in the military.
Yeah.
Um, and things kept being remote, and I just kept traveling. And that's actually how I made it to Hawaii. One of my friends from the Marine Corps was stationed here, and he was like, if you want to come to Hawaii, you should. And so I was going to come for 3 weeks because I had to quarantine for two. 1 week to explore, and I ended up staying for 6 months. And I just fell in love with it here. And it's kind of what kickstarted my international travels. I met a girl here just at a coffee shop, and she invited me to Costa Rica for a month. And then that opened my eyes into budget backpacking.
Right.
And I was working full time remotely, and I was still unhappy in my job. And so it kind of like lit the fire under my feet to be like, you know what, this is doable and it's really cheap. Um, I can just quit my job and travel around South America for a couple months. And that's what I did. I traveled throughout South America, and then I also did some more travel in the US across the country, camping out of my Honda Civic at the time. So it kind of was just like one thing led to the other.
Yeah. I mean, since starting this, so I've also traveled a lot, but just over the years and for work and studying and whatever. But it seems like from chatting with people that that story around COVID isn't super unique. Like a lot of people had to hit reset, if you will,
Yeah.
and then a lot of people discovered like, wait, like I can travel and I can do it on a budget. I can do it solo, which I know you talk a lot about on your Instagram as well. So yeah, kind of amazing.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like, honestly, COVID saved me. And I mean, I don't want to diminish the fact that it was horrible for so many people, but it really was the wake up call that I needed. I was climbing this corporate ladder, and, I was like, okay, I'm going to get my master's, I'm going to get married, I'm going to have the white picket fence, all of the things. And
Yeah.
I realized that that wasn't my dream. And I don't know what, I mean, I think I had a perfect storm. It was like the Marine Corps, my ex boyfriend, like COVID, all of it together. But I'm like, I don't know. Like, if I think for a lot of people, and that's kind of what I see traveling is because you'll meet people, and it's like immediately you go into like, why are you here? And a lot of people, it was like they hit a rock bottom of some sort, and it just kind
Yeah.
of forced them into doing something really scary, like buying a one-way ticket to South America or living in your car. I mean, neither one of those things are inherently glamorous, but I mean, it leads to some pretty cool opportunities and places to see.
And some pretty cool stories as well, I imagine.
Yes.
Yeah. So just segueing there, as you know, and thank you for sharing. As I said, I've seen more and more of this, and there's a lot of people traveling on a budget, backpacking, solo, doing whatever they can, and I think it's a great thing to do. It's a great experience, and that ideal kind of white picket fence scenario, not for everyone, or you can always get back to that. Go
Different phases of
experience.
life,
Yeah.
not there yet.
Um, as I was saying, the podcast is about stories. So like the stories that kind of stick with you, that you tell people about after you get back for years later, you bring up again. So I know you've got a story to tell us from your travels, which I'm excited about. Just to set kind of the context and background. Usually, I try to ask, like, setting the groundwork. Could you give us a little bit about where you were going? So the place itself, kind of the time or year, if you will, and yeah, why were you going there?
Yeah, okay, of course. Yeah, actually, it's so funny. Just like 2 days ago, this popped up in my memories. So actually, like a beginning part of the trip popped in my memory. So it might have been exactly 2 years ago right now
Mhm.
that this happened. It was in 2022. And it was a little bit after I initially went to South America and spent a couple months there. And I actually got called back to the Marine Corps to deploy,
Okay.
which I could have said no to, but I was still kind of in like my travel era, and I was like, this could be a unique opportunity to see a place from a different lens. So I was excited about it, but I also was like, oh my gosh, I need a last hurrah of traveling before I'm a little bit locked down again. So I decided to go on a quick trip to Colombia, and it was a really last minute trip, and I was doing a work exchange program through this company, World Packers, which, if people don't know, basically like it connects you with opportunities around the world to basically exchange your time or expertise in some sort of volunteering capacity for accommodation, food, and the one I was doing was actually with a motorcycle tour company. So they paid for where I was staying, and then I could use the motorcycles to explore Colombia on my off time.
Cool.
So on the weekends, I would go do little weekend trips. So this one particular weekend, I was staying in Santa Marta, Colombia, which is kind of on like the northern coast. Um, and then I was going to Minca, which is up in the mountains, this mountain village. It's really, people go there for like ecotourism. There's coffee plantations, cacao farms, really, really beautiful, but up in the mountains overlooking the sea below, basically.
Gotcha. And were you in the Marine Corps? So are you a reservist? Is that how it works when you get called up?
Yeah, kind of. So when you join the military, most likely you'll do 4 years active, but your contract's for 8 years. So you do
Hmm.
four active and four inactive. But like in those inactive years, if you're not actively in the reserves, you're basically still in, but you don't have to do anything. Like you could grow a beard, not me, but the guys can grow a beard. You can basically just live your life, but they could call you back up. And I could have said no, but I said yes. So
Okay.
that's kind of
But
how it works.
sorry, that was sort of a sidebar. I was just curious. I didn't really think
No.
about the beard thing though. That's funny. Um,
Yeah.
World Packers. That sounds amazing. Funnily enough, I did something similar in Ecuador years ago. So I think it's just a good thing for people to look into if they're trying to find like again cheap travel. Um,
For sure. And you know what? It kind of like, I mean, I'll get into the story, and I got into a little bit of a sticky situation, not too
yeah.
bad, but if you're worried about going to a country that you don't know anyone in, it also is kind of like a safety net because you're going to meet people who are expecting you, and they can give you kind of like the lay of the land, like go here, don't go here. Like, I know people in this town if you need something. So it was definitely a good, I mean, I had already been traveling for a while, so I wasn't super worried about it, but it was like a good safety net and kind of a good built-in network in the area.
Right. I'm assuming so when you arrive, you've got someone like you're supposed to meet and sort of a plan that they help you with.
Yeah, I mean, mine was a little bit loose,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, they coordinate a lot of this stuff. Like, if they, for me, they were providing accommodation. So, like, I showed up, and then like I didn't have to do any of the planning for the accommodation or anything like that. So it kind of eliminates some of the logistics, and then just it gives you at least somebody to talk to if, you know, traveling solo is new to you.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So take us to Colombia.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, last minute trip, I've kind of fallen in love with South America. I would still love to go back to Colombia. There's so much to do there, and I just saw like a tiny pocket of it. But yeah, this particular weekend, I was going to Minca, which is really close to Santa Marta, where I was staying, about like a 45-minute drive up the mountains, like windy mountain roads through some smaller villages. And this weekend, for some reason, like they had a bunch of motorcycle tours going on, so I couldn't use one of the motorcycles. So I was just going to take the bus. But
Hmm.
I had met some people at a local cafe like the day before, and this German guy was like, "Oh, I have a motorcycle. I'm going to Minka too. If you want to ride, like you can just ride with me." And I was like, "Oh, that's perfect." Like the
Yeah.
bus is fine, but like if he's going to pick me up right at my hostel in a motorcycle, like that's perfect. Um, and like he picks me up. I had a helmet and everything because I was working at the motorcycle place.
Right.
And immediately I was like, I don't know if he's the best motorcycle driver.
What gave
And
you that
then
sense?
he just seemed a little like unsteady. And then
Yeah.
because he was bringing all his stuff, he actually was living on a boat, and he was like traveling around on a boat. So he had just rented this motorcycle like moments before he picked me up.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And he had this like giant backpack on, not like a backpacking backpack, but it was like a big boxy one that was like waterproof because he was living on the boat. And I just had like a tiny backpack, so I like stuffed it in this giant backpack that he had. But
Okay.
because we were sharing the motorcycle, he was like, "Here, you wear the backpack." And so I put on this backpack, and honestly, this thing was like so big and so boxy that I had a hard time even just like getting on the motorcycle and balancing with it. So, like, let alone him being unsteady on this motorcycle, me on the back with a backpack that's like throwing the balance off of this thing. And then these
Okay.
Colombia roads are like motorcycles everywhere. Like it's pandemonium. And then it's also rainy season. And so when it rains, then the roads flood. Like
Yeah.
I'm talking like 6 inches of water you're just driving through. Luckily, it
Yeah.
wasn't flooded right now. But, and then he was like, okay, we need to stop and get gas. And then he reveals to me that he doesn't know where we're going at all. And so, so luckily, like I had data on my phone. I had an eSIM, and so I was like, "Okay,
How
I
long had you
got
been
you."
driving for? Sorry.
We had been, I mean, we just went to the gas station. It was probably like 10 minutes.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Um, he's like, "I don't know where we're going," and in his defense, it was like we were at a part that was like kind of the most confusing part where there were like roundabouts and different exits to take, and it was just a little bit crazy. So I was like, okay, like I'll navigate us. No big deal. I'll carry all your stuff. I'll navigate for us. And so then after this part, it gets like you're getting up in the mountains. So the roads are kind of winding like switchbacks. And this guy is just like flying around the corners. And I was like, okay, we're going to make it. It's going to be fine. But then the part that got me was like, we'd go through these villages, and they're like these small villages with like children and like animals in the road. Like, you need to slow down, like 5 miles per hour. And he was going like 40 miles per hour through these towns. And I was like, oh my gosh, we're gonna like take out, I don't know, a dog, a chicken, something.
Yeah. Question two. So by that point, had you been using the like? Were you quite proficient in motorcycles, given where you were staying? Like,
No,
okay,
not
okay.
really.
So
I mean,
you hadn't been like biking around through villages and stuff yet.
I had been biking around, but like just on my own. Like I don't trust myself to bike around with somebody on the back.
Gotcha. Okay. You had a little bit of the lay of the land though.
Yeah, I like knew my way around the town, but then I had never been to this area before.
Okay, so you're now flying around switchbacks and flying through towns.
Yes.
Okay.
And then you get to the town, and it's really small. It's like super mountainous, and even the hostels are pretty far out from the main town, down like dirt roads, more like up crazy dirt roads. So we were staying in different areas. But he was like, okay, so I'm the navigator. Bring us to my hostel, which was like way out there. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. Mind you, my plan in my mind was when we get there, I need to go to the ATM because I don't have any money.
Yeah. Never a great
And
feeling.
no, but I was so sure. I was like, it's fine. We'll get there. I'll get money. We'll get to the hostels. It's fine. But I didn't really realize that the hostels were so spread out away from like the main center of the town, which is pretty small. And so then we have to turn down this road that just is like straight mud, straight up a mountain. And it was like probably the worst road I've ever seen. Like you couldn't take a car down it, not even four-wheel drive. Like you had to take a motorcycle. It was like the
Okay.
only way you're
Okay.
gonna make it. And I was like, let's go slow, you know, because he had been flying. And I'm like, okay, we're about to get on this super slick thing. Like, take it slow. And he was like, no, we need to go fast to maintain our speed. And so he just starts trying to fly up this thing, and we're like slipping everywhere, losing traction. And I don't know how far we made it up the mountain, a while, but I finally was like, just let me off. Take your stuff, let me off. And I mean, at this moment, I was thankful that I had been navigating because I knew where we were, even though it was kind of far from civilization. I was literally on this, we hadn't seen a soul. We were just on this road.
Yeah.
And he was like, "Are you sure?" I'm like, "Yep, you're good. Just keep on going. I'll be fine." And I actually took a video of him like leaving me there, and I posted it on my story, and it was so bad people thought that it was a joke because he was like super unstable, just even himself, with his giant backpack going up the mountain. Like his feet were like dangling off the sides, and he was like, it was really bad. People were like, that has to be a joke, but unfortunately it was not.
They were, yeah, they thought you were just uploading some person driving by what you thought looked hilarious because they were driving up this mud road.
Oh my gosh.
Okay, well, probably it's smart on your on your end, but now you're standing on the side of like a muddy mountain road that can't handle cars. So, yeah, I mean, what was going through your head at that moment?
I mean, I think I was relieved, to be honest. I mean, after solo traveling for so long, I feel like you kind of get this mentality of like, okay, when it's me, like I can take care of me, but then when you get into a situation that you can't really control, like all of a sudden I'm on the back of this essentially stranger's bike. I mean, when you're solo traveling, you meet people all the time, and part of the beauty of it is being open to meeting people and experiences and making new friends. But you also kind of have to keep your guard up a little and be like, is this a safe situation to stay in? And at that point, I was like, this is not a safe situation to stay in. So I'm going to get myself out. So, I mean, I was thankful that I knew where I was. If I didn't have an eSIM on my phone, I don't think I even had service really where we were at that point, but I at least knew how we got there so I could backtrack.
I think before we get to the how you're getting out of there, it's a great point to sort of pause on, which is like that openness to meet new people, but then sort of a decisiveness. Like, you think you've learned that decisiveness over time, which is, I don't like the scenario, I'm out. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's probably, I mean, it carries over into life too. And I think that probably the military kind of gave it to me a little bit too. But even just living in my car, your guard is kind of always up because you're going to these new places with new people. And it really just is a good lesson to trust your intuition because luckily I have never gotten into a situation where I'm like, this is really bad or I'm getting mugged or anything like that. But there have been times when I've been traveling or on the road where I just like feel like something's off, and I don't even question it. I'm like, okay, maybe it's fine, but like I don't want to risk it. I'm going to turn around, or I'm going to go the other way, or I'm just going to stay in tonight. One time when I was on the road, I pulled into this park and I was just going to sit there for a minute and try and figure out my directions to the next place I was going. And for some reason, I felt like really off. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to plug in my directions and go. And in the 2 minutes that I was sitting there, I witnessed somebody's bike get stolen. Like this guy just like set his bike down to like get a drink of water. And somebody just came up, got on the bike and rode it away. And he was like running after the person, like, hey, that's my bike. And I
Oh
was like,
man.
it's crazy how like you can really you can feel it, and you just need to listen to that sense.
Yeah. And also trust yourself. I mean, as you said, you are in the middle of nowhere, but you felt confident you could get out based on what you knew. Sort of not a terrible lot of preparation needed necessarily, but you know.
No, definitely not. It's just kind of having it in the back of your mind to know. I feel like the people that I have met that have gotten into more situations, I mean, granted, bad things can happen anywhere, but
Mhm.
most of the people who I ran into who had gotten like mugged or something, if you just watch how they go about their day. It's like they're not paying attention to what's happening around them. Just being like a little bit extra alert, I think goes a really long way.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, you got out of there, you're off the bike, but you are in the middle of what presumably is a jungle, maybe, but the woods anyway.
Yeah,
And
like a
it's muddy.
mountain jungle.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. What's next?
Yeah, so I actually continued up the road instead of going back down the road because I don't know. I was like, I'm already way out here. There's obviously something up there. Um, do I want to walk an hour back to town with when maybe there's something cool like not that far up the road? So I ended up walking up the road, and not too long after, maybe like a 20-minute walk, I ran into this couple who was Australian, and I was like, "What are you guys doing? Like, where are you going?" And they were headed to a cacao farm, and I was like, "Oh, that sounds fun. Like, I'll go too." And so I ended up spending the day with them at this cacao farm, and the guy literally like picked it from the tree, and then we did the whole process to make it into chocolate. And he put like this chocolate face mask on me, and we drank our hot chocolate. And I did have a little bit of money. I had enough money to do that, which was like not a lot. But then after that, I was completely out of money. So I figured I was taking the hour and a half trek back to town, which was not even to my hostel, just to the ATM in town.
Um, I mean, it's kind of hilarious. You're like figuring it out, but it's like, I'll just go do this side, this side. This sounds nice, like,
I
um,
mean, I'm already this far up this road. Am I going to come up this road again? Probably not.
yeah. Did you tell the couple like what happened to you?
I did. I did. And then I think like the whole rest of the weekend, I was kind of looking around me like, oh no, am I going to run into this guy again? And is he going to be mad at me? Not that it really matters,
Yeah,
but
no, as you said, you did what you thought was best. So from there, did you have to walk all the way back?
I started the walk. The couple ended up, they were going kind of a different way because they wanted to stop at this waterfall. And I guess you had to pay to see the waterfall. And I was like, that sounds cool, guys, but I am broke. I can't see the waterfall. So then we went our separate ways, and I started walking down. And it was kind of like towards the end of the day at this point, it wasn't getting dark, but it was like definitely people were heading to their hostels. And how it operates there is they have these moto-taxi drivers because motorcycles are the only thing that can get down these roads. So this motorcycle taxi guy, he didn't even see me at first, and then he saw me and he stopped and he was like, "Oh, do you need a ride?" But he didn't speak English, so it was like all in Spanish. And I was like, "No, I'm sorry, but I have no money." And he was like, I mean, he was going down the mountain anyway, so it didn't really matter if he got paid. Like, something was better than nothing. And I was like, no, I swear, like, I'm not kidding. I have no money. And I literally opened up my little belt bag and counted the money I had, and it was equivalent to $1. and and he was like, "That's fine. I'll give you a ride. Where do you need to go?" And I told him to the ATM. So my plan was I was going to pay him when we got to the ATM. But he was so nice. He took me to the ATM, and then he took me to the hostel only for that $1 that I had. And then um, it was cool because we ended up like becoming friends, and we hung out for the whole next day. And he showed me a lot of really cool spots all around Minca.
Nice. I mean that a different motorcycle experience, kind of redemption. Yeah.
A way better experience. And I didn't know anyone in that town at all, so it was kind of cool. He dropped me off, and then I messaged him, and I was like, "Hey, like I want to go see the sunset. Where should I see the sunset?" And he was just like, "I'll pick you up. I'll take you to a spot." And I mean, we couldn't really communicate because I mean, my Spanish is basic, so we tried to communicate. He spoke no English, so I mean, it was really just, lots of hand gestures and whatnot. But yeah, then the next day he picks me up and we went all over. I mean, they're beautiful mountain roads in the clouds. There's also a lot of indigenous culture in Colombia, and so it was really cool to go up these roads and see how like indigenous tribes were living up in those mountains, just like they always have been.
Yeah, yeah, it's pretty fascinating. Uh, I was gonna ask about Spanish. I forgot earlier on, like whether you had, whether you spoke Spanish. I guess had you just been picking it up along the way by that point? You had been to a bunch of South American countries, right?
Yeah, I mean, the thing about it is you learn some and then you forget. But I
Sure.
did take Spanish in high school, probably for like 3 years, and then um, yeah, at this point, I've spent, I don't know, over 6 months in Spanish speaking countries, but it's kind of like you pick up a little bit and then you lose it and then you pick up a little bit more. So I still do my Duolingo every day, but we're slowly learning.
That's great. I know. You have to do it every day, and
You do.
you have to do the mix too. Listening, writing, watching, whatever.
Hmm.
Yeah.
But it really does help when you're there. Like when I was traveling around with this moto-taxi driver, I felt like those 2 days I learned more Spanish than I ever have because you're just forced to figure it out.
Yeah, that always holds true. It's amazing. It's impossible to replicate. I mean, you can try. I've actually tried, like, change my phone to a different language and change
Wow.
all my like TV shows and like podcasts, everything, and like you could. It's okay, but it is not the same as being forced. Like something in your brain,
Hmm.
when you're like, I have to figure this out. It's different, right?
And I feel like just the stakes of communicating with another person makes it more meaningful than just like, oh, I'm watching the news or listening to this podcast. It's kind of easy to just drown it out. But when you're actually trying to get a point across, you're like, I need to learn this because I can't communicate.
Yeah. Um, kind of awesome that it's on your way like down the mountain now, on your way back that you met someone else on a motorcycle that ended up, taking you around and so you got to explore.
Yeah, I mean, when you know the roads, actually, it's so funny. When I went back on Monday to my volunteer experience, I mean, they ride these roads all the time and they take tourists down them and stuff. And I told them about my experience and they were like, "Where were you going?" And I told them and their eyes got wide and they were like, "No, not that road. Like it's almost impossible to ride that road with a passenger on the back of a bike."
So after those 2 days, yeah, were you staying in that town at a hostel?
Yeah, I was staying at a hostel in Santa Marta, so not too far away.
Okay, so after sort of exploring Minca,
Hmm.
yeah, you
Yeah.
got back.
Yeah, it was just a quick weekend trip, which it was the cool thing about volunteering was that you could go on the weekend trips, but it's also when you're used to just doing whatever you want, whenever you want, you're like, okay, wait, I have to work during the week, and then I only have 2 days to go do something fun.
Yeah.
But
Um,
definitely worth it.
did you ever run into the German man again?
No, not really. I think I passed him when I was on the other motorcycle the next day. But I mean, it's kind of hard to tell when you're going by each other so fast and you have helmets on and everything. But no, I didn't.
It's just curious. You never know. I mean, explaining that this was an unsafe road to go up after,
I
and
know,
all
I
the like
know.
reactions from the people is kind of funny. But the other
I
thing,
felt more justified.
yeah, definitely sounds like you made the right choice. Also, I was remembering traveling myself, and it like it was really normal to hitchhike, like,
Mm,
but not like hitchhiking like we think of in the US. It's just people will like if you're walking, people usually with pickups was my experience, but they'll like it's super normal to stop and they'll be like, "Hey, jump in." And I remember specifically, you just gave them $1. Like that's all they would want. Is like I would just give them like it's almost like a tip, right? Like here's a buck, whatever.
yeah.
So do they have? Is it like that in Colombia as well, or where you were?
Um, Not necessarily, but I mean, yeah, a lot of places in South and Central America, it's not really real taxis. It's just like if you have a car and you're driving down the road, or you have a motorcycle and you're driving down the road, and I mean, you can kind of ask them like, how much do you want? But you can bargain with them and it's fine. It's like, I feel like in the US, people think it's really scary. They're like, you get in, and myself included, I don't think I'd get in a random car in the US. But in other countries, it's like, yeah, it's just like a taxi.
Yeah, basically. I mean, most of my experience, it was they're trying to help people out. Like it wasn't just tourists. I
Hmm.
saw lots of other locals doing the same thing, which makes you a little bit more comfortable, right?
Yeah, good point. I mean, the place that I get the most sketched out is the airport. There, I try
Mm.
and take something more
Yeah, it's a bit of a
official.
trap, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, well, like how I guess how was the rest of your time in Colombia?
It was really good. I mean, because I was volunteering, it felt like a little more chill. It was kind of like you got in a routine with everything, but the people that I was volunteering with were really cool. They were actually Americans, like most of them, who
Hmm.
moved down to Colombia and they were kind of homesteading there.
Wow.
Um, I actually my uncle is married to an indigenous Colombian lady.
Mm.
So it's kind of like a really interesting tie that I didn't even really think about when I was down there. But since being down there, I have met her and she has told me a lot about their customs and their culture. I mean, she doesn't speak English either, so it's, how much I can interpret from what she's saying, because it's also like she'll speak Spanish, but then also their indigenous language. And it's
Mm.
just really interesting. I feel like Colombia was the place where I noticed that the most. I mean, I feel like in Peru and other places, there is still the indigenous culture, but I felt like it was very small. And in Colombia, at least where I was, it felt very prominent.
Hmm. That's fascinating. I honestly haven't heard a lot about it. Like I've had a lot of friends visit Colombia. I haven't had the chance, but it's funny. Like I hear about it more around Peru, um,
Hmm.
and along the Andes, I guess, all the way up and down. But yeah,
Yeah.
I really not a lot about indigenous culture in Colombia. So that's very interesting.
I feel like most people they go to more of like the bigger cities like Medellin, and I mean you wouldn't see it there, or like
Hmm.
Cartagena, Cartagena. I don't know how you say it. um, but yeah, um, yeah, that was the part that I thought was the most interesting. But I guess I was a little bit more off the beaten path there. So
Yeah, I mean,
a-
like,
actually, Minca is where a lot of backpackers go for the Lost City trek, which
hmm.
is kind of like, I don't know, like the Machu Picchu of Colombia, just lesser known. I feel like it's a pretty old indigenous site. Um, and like the indigenous population is still pretty active there. So I think that's part of the pull of the trek is because you get to see kind of how they're living their life.
Got it. Yeah, I haven't heard of that. Did you do that trek?
I didn't do it. I mean, I didn't have enough time because I only had the weekend, but I think it's like a 3 or 4 day trek. And
Oh well.
I know people who did it, and they said it was really cool, but it's it's in the jungle, so it was like lots of bugs, really rainy. They said it was an adventure for
Gotcha.
sure.
And then yeah, well, just because you started here, I guess when you got back, and then you shipped out, I suppose.
I did. It was a culture shock. I got back home and then I drove to North Carolina and it was like an immediate different world going to the range and doing training and getting ready to leave the country with a group of Marines that I didn't even know.
Yeah, that's crazy. It's just an interesting kind of juxtaposition of what you were
Yes.
doing and then where you were going.
I literally laughed when I got there. I mean, you're supposed to be kind of serious, but when I like sat down and they kind of gave me the rundown of what was going to happen, I literally was like, I was just backpacking in Colombia, and now you're telling me that I'm going to go to this like crazy military training and then fly halfway across the world the next day? Like, is this a movie?
It kind of sounds like it. I mean, it's a wild story. Something maybe you should write someday. Um,
I should. I should.
yeah. Awesome. I before we wrap, what do you like? What do you have planned next? I know you've kind of kept up with the travel. You've got great content on your Instagram. What's coming up?
Oh my gosh, I don't know. I'm definitely more of a last minute planner kind of person.
Yeah.
I actually just got back from a trip on the mainland, which is always fun. I don't know. I'm thinking about maybe doing van life in the summer. I want to get back to the Philippines, do some Asia while
Yep.
I'm close in Hawaii. So I also want to do a couple months in Mexico, solidify that Spanish. So really, it's a toss up.
I feel like that's the answer I usually get when I ask folks that have sort of made travel part of their life. So,
Hmm.
all right.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story. A lot of ups and downs on motorcycles, literally.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you for having me on, Andrew. I love this idea that you have. I mean, so many like travel stories are just unlike any other kind of story. Sometimes they'll just come out and I'll realize that they're not really a normal story.
Right.
But when you invited me, I was like, I need to think of something. I don't know. So,
Yeah, and I think maybe you don't realize it till you get home, but some of the learnings they stick with you. They're important elsewhere, and as we were talking about in yours, like that kind of decisiveness, trusting your gut, like you need that.
absolutely, everybody needs that. Trust yourself.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Andrew.
Well, thanks so much to Tara for coming on the podcast today and sharing another great story, and one with an important lesson about assessing situations and then sticking to your gut and being decisive. It can be really important when you're traveling. As I mentioned at the beginning, she's got great content online, lots for solo travelers and lots of inspiring stuff. So check her out at Adventera across social media. And as always, if you've got an interesting travel story that you'd love to share, or you can find me at oneofftravelstories.com.